Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the NBA Front Office Show. Happy Friday. We've got a lot of NBA basketball to talk about today, and actually a lot of stuff that's salary cap related. So, right up our alley. Thank you, Adrian Wojnarowski and Mark Stein, for breaking some news today on the labor negotiation between the NBA and the NBPA, what the next collective bargaining agreement could look like. Maybe, just maybe, a few bumps in the road. I'm Trevor Lane. You can find me on Twitter at Trevor_Lane, over on Instagram at Trevor Lane NBA, joined by Keith Smith at Keith Smith NBA. Keith, little fun Friday here. Thought it was going to be pretty quiet, and the next thing you know, it's I think the phrase that Stein used was that the labor negotiation might not be such a layup. Here we go.
Yeah, and I think that's maybe true. We'll see. It feels like every one of these labor negotiations starts out with one side or the other asking for some huge concession from the other side, because that's where you kind of go in, right, to a negotiation. You say you go to buy a car, you're never going to be like, I want to pay full price, right? You're like, I want to pay far less. And then they're like, how about full price? And then you kind of start from there, right?
Sure.
So this is to kind of lay it out, because I don't know that everybody understands exactly this. So let's just make sure we're all on the same page. Nothing is going to happen to this season. This is not, did people keep hearing this December 15th opt-out date of the CBA? And I've already had people ask, like, so wait, the whole season could end a month and a half from now? No.
Right.
They are fully locked in, all agreed through the remainder of this season. But what happened is there's a mutual opt-out. So either side, players or owners, can opt out of the CBA by December 15th of this year. And that would mean next year, there's no collective bargaining agreement. There's no collective bargaining agreement. That means in almost all assurances, there would be no league if there was no collective bargaining agreement, because players aren't going to play without an agreement, and owners aren't going to want to field teams without any kind of agreement either. So what happens is, roughly, let's say a year in advance, pretty close, right? It's like 10 months in advance. Either side could opt out. Now, both sides are expected to agree to opt out. But even if only one wanted to, they can here. And the reason why you do that is it's the only real way to bring in actual changes to these systems without having to do a ton of side letter agreements and all these other things to the main collective bargaining agreement. So what's going to happen here with this is they're going to opt out. The going in assumption has been, we're going to be fine. They're going to opt out, but they're going to negotiate. Maybe even they negotiate and get it done before the opt out. It's kind of what happened last time. And then we moved right into the new CBA without any changes to the playing calendar or anything like that. Ton of changes to the CBA came in, but nothing big. So we're going to see what happens in advance of that December 15th date. But what we all thought was like, everybody's making a ton of money here. Everybody's going to be fine. If either side draws a hard line on issues one way or the other, these are the kind of things that could delay a negotiation. And then really, if they delay it long enough, could impact the calendar for the league as far as free agency starting and all those kind of things. And then the start of the next league year.
Which is not what anybody wants. Like you said, the league's been making money and all that. You don't want a delayed start to the league. You don't want anything to get delayed. You want them just to come to an agreement and everybody, troll on down the lane together. This is not the kind of thing that you want stopping NBA play. But when you start talking about, like a hard cap, that can become a highly contentious issue. Although the point you made was one that also Howard Beck made on Twitter. Said, look, every labor negotiation, as shocking as all of this is, they all kind of start this way. So it's not really that shocking that the league would come out swinging, asking for the moon, because they know they're probably not going to get that. But the word is that the league would like, the NBA would like some sort of, what did they end up calling it? Upper spending limit?
Yeah, upper spending limit, upper salary limit.
I like that.
I've heard it referred to informally as a USL.
Yeah.
So whatever. It's a lot of people are like, wait, so they want a hard cap? Well, the NBA already has a hard cap system in place.
Mhm.
If you trigger that hard cap, we'll talk more about that in just a minute. But
Right.
this would literally be
A
you
true.
cannot spend more than X dollars. So
Right.
you could go 50 million over the luxury tax line, but then that's it, no further, or wherever they wanted to set that line at. So that is important to know. Yes, there is a hard cap, but this would be truly a number every single team would be bound to. You cannot spend more than this.
I like that they're going with a strategy of, well, let's just not call it a hard cap. Let's call it an upper
Sure.
spending limit
Yeah.
because that sounds less scary and has less negativity attached to it
Yeah.
because things like that certainly matter. It's an age old tactic, right? You see it in politics all the time. But let's just
Mhm.
not call this a hard cap. But it's a hard cap in effect. Now, the word has already been that the Players Association are saying this is a non-starter, meaning it's not even something we're not even going to discuss this. This is
Yeah.
we're not doing this.
Yep.
Um, why does the NBA want this? Why would the majority of NBA teams want this when you're looking at right now? You and I talked about this right before we came on the air. Luxury tax payments to 20 of the NBA teams, which would equate to about $35 million per team. Seems to me like that's a pretty nice chunk of change coming their way to incentivize sticking with the current system with the luxury tax being something that works. Even though the Golden State Warriors won, you're still bringing in a ton of extra money because
Mhm.
the Warriors are paying all this money in luxury taxes.
Yeah, why you would have teams that want this is, as you said, 20 teams are not going to pay the luxury tax this year, or are not set up to at this moment, right?
Right.
There's a handful that are pretty close and could maybe go over. There's also a couple that are close enough to, with a move or two, they could probably dip out of the tax. But let's just say, for sake of keeping it easy, there's going to be 10 teams that are going to pay the tax this year, and that's because that's what it's set at today. Those 10 teams, as you said, are going to pay somewhere between 1.7 million in tax penalties and 170 million in tax penalties. It's that 10 or I'm sorry, 100, right, or 10, yeah, well, 100 time multiplier there that makes that difference, right? Is it is you get there. So the Warriors 170 million in tax penalties, the Clippers 145 million in tax penalties,
Mhm.
the Nets 108 million in tax penalties. So that is not an even playing field, right? You've got three teams in major market cities that can have very rich ownership groups that can pay that and not even have to think about it. I think
Mhm.
it was Forbes just came out and said the Warriors franchise valuation is $7 billion right now for the Golden State Warriors. Yeah, exactly, Dr. Eva. Well done, my friend.
$1 billion. Yep.
So it is, then you flip that to teams like Oklahoma City, Orlando, uh, San Antonio, some of those teams that are they are near the bottom. Now, I am by no means saying these poor owners in those cities, right? Because they're all billionaires. These are all toys for all of these guys.
Mhm.
But we've said over and over again, Steve Ballmer can write checks that no one else in the league can match, right? Because
True.
he just makes so much money. So that's where you start to become in a challenge for him to blow this far past the luxury tax line and not even really think about it in the span of a couple years. Just says he could be the next Warriors and then go way beyond that. If they hit on the right mix of guys that are worth paying, they can just keep up their bill and get hit with the repeater penalties and everything else because he just doesn't really care about what the bill is. He wants to build a winner. And so now, what the NBA wants to propose is we're going to slap a number on there, and I'm just going to say 160 million.
Sure.
You can't spend more than 160 million in salary this year. So that's where it is. Where we're going to say 160 million. That's what it is. That's roughly 10 million above the tax line or whatever you want to call it. Where we're going to say that's where it is. You cannot go above that number, and that's where everybody stops and everybody's even then, right? Because then you can't have the Warriors having tax penalties that are so far over and
Mhm.
above, because the hard cap as it exists in today's structure and has for several years and in multiple iterations of the CBA, it is only triggered if you do certain things. It's only triggered if you acquire a player via sign and trade. If you give a contract using the non-taxpayer mid-level exception that's greater than what you can give using the taxpayer, that can either be in terms of dollars or in terms of years, or you use the biannual exception. The reason why those hard cap teams, those are not available to teams that are above the tax apron, and the tax apron becomes the hard cap. I know you became very familiar with the hard cap
Mm.
with the Lakers a couple years ago, because what happened with them was it was just a consistent conversation of they were right up against it. I mean, they were at points, it was like
Right there.
right
Yep.
there. So I mean, I remember you and I sitting down on an episode of this show and figuring out on the fly when the Lakers could sign players for the rest
That's
of the regular
right.
season,
We were
because it
waiting
was,
for the a minimum contract to get
yep,
prorated to the point where the
exactly,
Lakers
to
would
a
have
point.
just
Yep.
enough.
Yep,
Yep.
and they had like 2
Fun
roster
times.
spots to fill that year, I think. So it was
Mm.
like, well, they could do 1 on this day if they did a, 10-year veteran guy and all this stuff. So that's that, but that was because I want to say that year, I think maybe they'd done a sign and trade. I can't remember what triggered it for them, but they'd done one of the items to trigger a hard cap. So right now, this year, there's roughly, let's see, let me count it. There are 10 teams, so a third of the league that is hard capped. Obviously, none of them are these teams that have blown way beyond the tax line, because
Mhm.
you can't do that if you're hard capped. You get stuck there. But in the case of the Warriors, because they're so far over, they can't do a sign and trade, requiring a player now. They can't use they only have the taxpayer Emily. They never get the biannual because they're so far over, so they never get hard capped. So then when they acquire a player, it just adds on to their bill and goes up. So that's what happens there. So that's the little bit of the challenge. The league wants to introduce this new language that says this is the new true, upper spending limit, upper salary limit, whatever they want to call it. This
Mhm.
is the new number where it is. But we're still going to have mechanisms that do, X, Y, and Z. We'll still have our soft cap where you can operate, but there'll be some room in between there, 10, 20 million, whatever it is. But once you get to this number, you can't go past it. And the Players Association is like, nah, no, we don't want that. We're
Yeah.
not going to do that.
Yeah, which means it's not going to happen unless
Correct.
there's some serious concessions coming from the
Mhm.
NBA side to the NBPA on some other topics. Maybe it's the restricted free agency, right? I mean, there's other things that they could
Sure.
say. Well, if you give us this, we will give you
Yep.
X, Y, and Z. But it sounds
You
like
could
that's
even
not
have
even
the
something they're considering.
Exactly. You could have the MBPA come back and say, fine, then eliminate individual player max
True.
salaries. If I
Yep.
want to pay, LeBron James $100 million, I can pay LeBron $100 million, and then I got to fit the rest of my roster in around that, but I can do what I want. Maybe that's where they go. Now, there's a couple places where this gets kind of weird, right? Is the only this doesn't really truly change a ton for the players, in the sense of the players are still, they're always guaranteed to get, it's roughly, think of it as 50% of the basketball revenue that
Hmm.
comes in. There are mechanisms where they can get as little as 49% and as much as 51%, but it's really designed for them to get 50%. That's the way the system is supposed to work. And it's why it ranges between 49 and 51 is there are year over year things where if they came in under one year, they can come in over the next year to rebalance, because it's always trying to get them in a overall few year snapshot to 50%. So to some extent, let's say they're splitting up, I don't know, a few hundred, 100 billion in revenue.
Hmm.
They're going to get their 50 billion in revenue no matter what. So there's some people who are being like, well, why do we care if it's the Warriors spending it or it's
Right.
everybody spending it as a collective, right? Well, the reason why the players don't want this is if you start putting this hard cap on teams, it's going to limit movement, right? Because it'll be, well, we can't do anything else. Can't even sign a player. Let's go back to that Lakers example. We had to figure it out down to the day when they could add just a player to fill out the bench. And it was, we can't do it because we're stuck at this number, so we just have to do this. So that's where they are. Even if the money doesn't change overall to their collective institution of players, they're but now it used to be 450, now it's 510 if you count the two-way guys. The 510 players, it doesn't change anything in their world as far as they're all going to get that money, but it does from freedom of movement. It does from an individual player, how much they can get in a salary and those kind of things. So that's where it really does start to change that math. And that's where it gets, a little bit wonky on, all right, how are we going to, balance this? From the team side, teams want it because if I'm the Magic or I'm the Thunder, I know I can't keep up with the spending of a few of these,
Yeah.
giant market teams. So yeah, I'd like it to be a little bit more balanced so that we lock it in, knowing I'm not really changing anything, right? The players still get their half of the overall money. And yeah, I may get less money in revenue sharing, but I may have a better chance to win every single year because I'm not constantly chasing the Warriors and Clippers who are spending in some cases 3 and 4 times, in total between roster plus tax bill, 3 and 4 times what I'm spending on my roster. And that's why the teams are asking for this.
Well, and that's the thing, right? Teams don't want winning to have a prerequisite of spending. They don't want
Right.
just the team that spends the most becomes the team that wins. That's not what they want to see happen in the system. And if that happened, then you would just know year in and year out, okay, these are going to be the good teams, these are going to be the bad teams, and you kind of already do to a degree. You can say the NBA doesn't have a ton of parity. It's certainly not like the NFL where a team can be terrible one year and the next year suddenly they're one of the best teams and they've got the best defense or whatever. It's not like that in the NBA already, but it could become an even further situation of haves versus have-nots if we wind up in a place where you have to spend $200 million in order to field a winning team.
Yeah, in now on the flip side, I would say this is not a perfect statement to make because if you draft the right quarterback or wrong quarterback in the NFL, you can either greatly improve your chances of winning
Mhm.
or ruin them. But in the NBA, a Victor Wembanyama comes around, and I realize he's like a once in a generation prospect, but whoever the top player is, Paulo Banchero this year, you can draft that player and drastically change the fortunes of your entire team with one player
Mhm.
because you're only talking one of 5 players on the court at a time, one of 15 to 17 players on a roster at a time. We're in the NFL, the only real position that can do that, and forgive me if people are like, oh, what about a lockdown cornerback or
Sure. Right.
but
Yeah.
it's really the quarterback, right? Like it's the quarterback that kind of, in a lot of ways, that's the guy who can full on control your fate. So that's where it becomes, the challenge is the pushback is in the NBA. There is the potential for parity, but to your point, what they really want to avoid is they don't want to become Major League Baseball, where for
Correct.
years it was, all right, it's going to be the Yankees and the Dodgers and the Red Sox and a handful of other teams are going to spend, 6 times as much in payroll as the A's and the Rays, and those teams are going to have to, for lack of a better term, moneyball their way into success, right? Which they did, obviously,
Mhm.
but also only to a point. None of those teams ever won a championship, right? So it really turned into still, and it's still this way in baseball. The best, or not the best, but the biggest teams can go and get players that other teams simply cannot afford. When you have sometimes one or two guys combined making more money than another team's entire payroll, that's what the NBA wants to make sure. Hey, we don't want to be that, right? We do not want, the Warriors, the Clippers, the Nets, the Knicks, if they get good enough, the Lakers, the Celtics. If
Mhm.
those teams get good enough, we don't need them spending so much that they are, 4 times ahead of the Magic and the
Right.
Thunder and the Spurs and the Pacers and all those mid-major market teams. That's just not where they want to be.
Yeah, this is essentially this proposal is a Warriors rule. Um, this is and Clippers as well. They're in the mix here.
Which
Warriors just get more of the attention because they just won a championship. But the Clippers,
exactly.
obviously, the Clippers have also fielded a roster that most teams wouldn't be comfortable spending
Sure.
as much as they're spending, and they've got a very deep and very good roster, especially if they're healthy.
Sure.
But again, I
I mean,
don't
the
see
Clippers are at a just to give perspective on this,
Mhm.
the Warriors tax bill. So this is the taxable salary plus penalties is projected to be 170 million. The Clippers is 145 million, and the Nets is 108 million. Then you get into like Celtics, Lakers, Bucks, Suns. Like those teams are all in what I would say is more normal ranges, and I'm doing quotes around normal for those who aren't watching, because it's to be in a penalty of 30 to 50 million. We see that at least one or two teams every year in that range. But to see teams, the Warriors are spending as much in tax penalties as they're spending on salary almost, which is bonkers when you think about it. Like, that's how high their salaries are, which drives how high the tax penalties are. But yeah, it's crazy. One thing I do want to say with the Warriors, just and I'll only pump this once, is I wrote for Spot Track over the summer after the Warriors won the championship, and there was all the it's a checkbook win and blah 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 blah. I wrote that that's unfair because the Warriors, most of their roster, they drafted and developed.
Mhm.
So it's really unfair to criticize them. That's where, if I'm the Warriors and if I'm the Clippers or whoever, I am coming back and saying, hey, get it. If you want to set this upper spending limit, then you have to give us some form of break on. If I drafted a guy, if I drafted Steph Curry, 13, 14 years ago, whatever it's been, and he's awesome, I should have to let him go because
I
I've
did too good
hit
of a
my
job drafting,
yeah, I
right?
did too
Yeah.
good of a job drafting a once in a lifetime talent like him. No, I should get all right. I pay him 50 million real dollars, but as far as my tax goes, that's only 25 million or 30 million or
Mhm.
40, whatever it is. There should be some benefit I get for hitting on these guys. Yeah, you go and trade for guys, or you go and you know get these guys via free agency and stuff, then maybe you can say, nah, you're going to pay the full boat, right? That's only fair. But yeah, drafting and developing, or maybe if I trade for a guy on his rookie scale deal and I get him so early, like, why am I being punished, with this full amount? There's definitely things you can do to build in there. One other thing that needs to be looked at with the taxes is right now, every break for the penalties is about $5 million. That's a relic from back when the mid-level exception was like $5 million.
Right, yeah,
So it was kind of like, all right, well, you had the mid-level, like, you're gonna trip a new level. The mid-levels now, it's projected to be over $11 million next year, the full mid-level. And then it's only going to go up, up, up. And we're going to get into that in just a second here about the up, up, up part of it. But it is they got to redo those tax penalties
agreed.
tiers, because they don't make sense at every 5 million anymore. 5 million is like, oh, so I'm being punished for having a mid first round pick. Like, that's
Right.
not shouldn't be a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. That needs to be adjusted as well. You mentioned salaries rising. Last time we had this situation with a new TV deal coming in, which is what's going to be coming in just a couple of seasons here. A lot of money coming in. I saw the latest projections were 24 billion, I believe, in TV revenue.
Something
The
like
next
that.
the
Yeah.
next deal would be something like that. Um, Last time around, the NBPA did not want cap smoothing. They wanted all of that money to just flood the market right away, and the cap would jump up, and they didn't want it to be sort of spaced out over the years as a
Yep.
gradual increase. They just wanted no, let's go for this. The NBA in general was in favor of a smoothing agreement where you could phase this money in. NBPA was not in favor of it, and what wound up happening was Kevin Durant wound up with the Warriors. Like the cap jumped up so much that suddenly
What
a
else
team that
happened that
yeah,
summer?
that that's really it, right? That's all that happened.
Yeah.
Kevin
Yeah.
Durant went to the worst, but that's what everybody remembers from that,
Sure.
right? Was
Yeah.
the cap jumped
Yeah.
up so much that a team that shouldn't have had cap space suddenly had room to go sign a max player.
Which
And
again, God, I sound like such a Warriors apologist. But what gets missed there was they had Draymond Green on a ridiculously undervalued
yes,
contract because he was a second round pick. You had Stephen Curry on his what was his second deal, which was he was so underpaid
ankles.
because of the ankles, right? Yeah,
Yep.
exactly. They didn't give him the max deal. And then you had Clay. I don't know if he had tripped his second one yet, but yeah, they had those three star guys that were the core of that team in a decade, or half a decade or whatever later, but a decade after they came together, are still the core of that team, which is wild in and of itself. But those factored in. But yes, the cap jumping up and everybody saying, "Nah, we're not going to smooth it out." Well, guess what? You created to some extent then this idea of the Warriors, what they are, and the fact that it has continued for years and years and years.
Mhm. Yep. Yeah. And now it sounds like cap smoothing will I think there's going to be some back and forth on exactly what it should look like.
Yeah.
but I don't think we're going to see that massive 1 year spike again
No,
from the NBA.
and obviously I was, picking on you a little bit, but the other part of what happened was the Deng and Mozgov type deals get signed.
Mhm.
And those are the most famous ones because the Deng one hung on a couple more years because he was waived and stretched. Mozgov ended up getting traded, I want to say two, at least twice, maybe three times before
Yeah.
the end of that contract. He didn't actually even finish it out in the NBA, had to medically retire. But what ended up going on with those was guys like that got the money in the summer of 2016
Yeah.
because
They happen
teams
to be free agents then.
exactly they just happened to hit free agency in the right year. Then the next year, a team like the Lakers was capped out and couldn't sign anybody else when maybe there was a better free agent available the next year. Now, to some extent, that always exists, right? That's why your roster planning is not a 1 year go for it kind of thing
Mhm.
unless you're truly right there to win a title. It generally is more of a we need to take a 3 to 5 to 6 to 7, 8, 9, 10 year horizon approach of what does this look like, with how we're going to plan out our roster and our spending and all these things. But very quickly, I think the players were like, what the heck? Like these
Yeah.
mid tier guys got a ton of money, which now is laughable. Like 16 million is like going to be the mid level basically
Right.
in a couple years. And it's like, there was like, dang, got this monster contract.
But for the time, that was
At the time it
massive.
was absolutely.
And
Yep.
people struggled, front offices even struggled to figure out what was the new norm.
Yeah.
Was that a good
So,
deal? Was that a bad, because when things go up that quickly, that fast,
yep.
to everybody struggles to kind of catch up and figure out. It's almost like we had to, and I remember doing this a bunch, we had to translate the
Yes.
dollars into the new
Absolutely.
reality.
Yep. Yeah. So just for perspective for everyone, the 2015-16 cap was 70 million. The next year, which is the summer when all these guys got their new deals, it went to 94 million. 24 million jump when it had been, this is what it had been. Let's go back to like the early 2000s, 49.5, 53, 55, 58. It actually went down in 29 or 2009 10. I think that was because of lockout related stuff. 57, 58, 58, 58, 58.7, 63, 70, 94. That's what caused those deals. That's what caused and allowed for Durant to the Warriors. So cap smoothing. Now, what's different between now and then is even with this stuff of like the MBPA is pushing back really hard against this hard cap idea, the league and the Players Association have a far better relationship now than they had back then.
They went
Back
through a
then,
pandemic together. Like that
yeah,
matters.
exactly. They made it through three pandemic impacted seasons as far as lost games, major challenges, including obviously the bubble, right? But there were back then, I would have counseled the MVP. I would have been like, no, say no, because they're gonna screw you somehow, right?
Mhm.
You're never gonna see if you said we're gonna spread that 24 million by being 8 million a year, and we'll just tack an extra 8 million on. So maybe it goes 8, 16, 24 or something.
Then
You're
you're
never
losing
gonna
on
see it,
interest and
right?
all of that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. You're gonna lose. It's never gonna happen. Now you've got a good working relationship. You've got a lot of people who are really they've been through it now. They know we don't want another 2016 situation. So I think highly likely we will see some form of cap smoothing, which is to some extent it's it is overall better for everybody, but it bums me out because we're not going to see the insane stuff like we don't know, like, oh my gosh, this guy who's a backup, wing got, $25 million deal. Like, what are we doing? And then more also, it's just going to create more work for guys like me who are going to have to be like, all right, so the cap should have been X, but with the smoothing applied, it'll be Y.
There,
And,
there would need
those
to
kind of
be
things.
like how Google Translate you can just punch a
Yes.
word in and it comes out in your
Oh,
preferred
that'd
language.
be,
We would need
yeah.
that for the cap, basically.
Yeah, I could tell you like on Spot Track and everybody I know, everybody's just going to have it built in,
Yeah.
just translate for them. But yeah, couple more things though that we got out of this.
Yep. The one and done.
Yeah, yep,
Sounds like it's done. Or will be
or
done
will
anyway
be
when
done
when
possibly.
this goes through. 18-year-olds back in the NBA with some concessions, which I think is maybe the bigger piece here because we've heard this brewing for a while that hey, look, we're probably going to be allowing 18-year-olds into the NBA, particularly with the G League becoming more and more of a proper support system, and all
Yeah.
of the stuff, right? There's plenty to get into there, but um, there are some requirements, like the NBA say, well, if we do this, we don't want agents to be able to withhold medical information except for select teams. We
Yep.
want to kind of take away agents steering players towards specific locations, which I think is interesting that that's something that's being put in there, particularly when you talk about medical info, because then there's personal rights and everything that get mixed into it. But that is going to be a piece to this.
Yeah, what happens in today's world is how agents can control whether or not a player will draft a team is. One part of it is we're
Other
not
way
going to
around,
look
but
out
yeah.
for you. What was that? What did I? Oh, did I say it backward?
Well, no, I guess really from the agent's perspective, you said
Yeah,
it right. A
it's
player
yeah,
will draft a
yes,
team.
correct. Yeah, that is basically how they do it, right? Is
Yeah.
hey, we don't want to go to team X. So one way is we're not going to work out for you. Well, often teams are like, okay, I don't care. I've seen your tape in college, G League, whatever it is, G League Ignite.
That
I'm just
would
going to
be a
draft you.
really cool that would never happen, but that would be a really cool TV segment pre-draft to have the top draft picks sit around and draft the teams
The
that they want to
team.
go to.
That would be fun.
That would be fun.
Now, the other way teams control this is teams come back and they say, or I'm sorry, agents control this is we're not going to release the player's medical info to you, and we're not going to let you do a physical for that player. And what ends up happening there is several teams in the NBA have a hard and fast rule of no medical, no draft. And it is if I can't see what this kid looks like, if I can't get my hands on him, and this is sometimes even with players, no history of any kind of injury at all, but it's I got to see the bone structure. I got to make sure a foot isn't going to break. I need to look and make sure his knees look sound for the next. Because if you think about it, a drafting of a player, ideally you're hoping that is a minimum 10-year investment, right? First contract, second contract, and then you go from there. So that's there's a lot of teams that are if I can't get the medical, we will not draft the player. And obviously the players and agents know this. So they start playing games with, all right, well, we don't want to go to you. So no medical, no physical. So the NBA is basically saying, hey, if you want the one and done rule to go away, which sneaky thing is, I think it's turning to the NBA wants that to go away
Yeah.
more than the Players Association to some extent. We want all medicals need to be freely shared with all 30 teams. And basically it's kind of the idea is you're trying to enter the NBA collective as a whole. So now it's going to, your medical information is going to go to the collective as a whole.
Mhm.
Now, maybe they'll say your baseline by an independent physician needs to be what's shared. And then if, all right, I'm cool with going to, Team X. Team X can do a full scale workup of their own on you. You can hold back, but your baseline medicals all need to be shared. We'll see where that comes from. But yeah, it's going to be very interesting with this. Now, a couple people have asked, because I've said this before, places where they're like, well, why are you saying the Players Association isn't as good with the one and done? Every 18-year-old that comes into the league, we're not
Let's
increasing
go.
roster sizes. That pushes a vet out. So
Mhm.
you're going to see a vet go out, and that means that's a guy who won in terms of the collective could be making $2-3 million a year for a kid who may come in and be especially if it's a second rounder making $1.5 million or something along those lines. So that's one of your little bit of your challenge there, isn't it? It's also you're telling vets like we don't have a job for you anymore. Good luck overseas, good luck in the G League, whatever it is. So there's back and forth on this. The ultimate end goal is everybody is of the belief these kids will develop best if they're attached to an NBA team versus being in college. This is not the time nor place to have the NBA is better than the NCAA
Right. Yes.
argument, but that is the belief across the board. Professionals develop better in a professional setting. So there we are. That's where we're headed with this.
Yep. Looks like that's where that's ultimately going to go. Last thing that we've got, load management. The league wants to incentivize players to play games. Isn't that what their salary is for? But in any event, the league wants to cut down on star players sitting out of marquee matchups. They think that's going to help with their TV deal. Like, if it's a random Wednesday night in January and you find out that LeBron and Anthony Davis are both not playing, you're probably not turning on that game unless you're like a diehard Lakers Nation fan or something like that, right?
Or
You might just
worse,
skip that.
you find out early enough, you're not buying a ticket and not
That
going to the
too.
game.
That too.
Yeah.
Or for if you do buy a ticket, you now have, let's say you spent, look, NBA tickets are not cheap.
Hmm.
Let's say you saved and saved and saved, and you said, this is my one game I'm going to this year. And then hours before the game, it turns out these guys were out, which look, there's some risk of that happening anyway.
Yeah.
I'll never forget as a kid, my Christmas present was tickets to Shaq's first season in LA to go to one
Oh,
game, and he got hurt the game before. That's just
yeah.
that's just what happens sometimes, right?
Yep.
That's the way it goes. But
Yep.
they want to cut down on the negative experience. That you don't want to have that negative memory as fans are leaving the arena like, "Hey, yeah, that wasn't that great because we got our teeth kicked in, none of our stars played, and this I'm not gonna do this again," right? You don't want that.
Yeah.
So the NBA wants to cut down on those types of situations, and they want to figure out some way to incentivize players to not sit out games.
So, very real example, living here in Orlando. The Magic have not been good for a few. Let's just say a while. Even in the playoff years, they were still a bottom end playoff team, right?
Mhm.
So it was they haven't been contenders since Dwight left. So now what's happened is over years is this has become a popular spot, especially for West Coast teams, to rest guys when they come through. So I have friends who now every year who are, some who are Lakers fans, some who are Suns fans, some who are like Nuggets fans,
Right.
and they'll say to me, "Hey, so they're only coming in on, January 10th. Do they play the night before? Like, is this like the fourth game of a road trip? Is this the last game? Like, because they have started to figure it out. Like, there's a chance this the guy I want to see is not going to play, or I'm going to see the Lakers, but it's going to be, five backups and, two rotation guys who play most of the game. And that's, it's a very real problem in
Mhm.
the NBA. It's, like I always say, you go to a Major League Baseball game, there's 162 of them, and very few players play 162 games anymore. So you're always running the risk of, hey, my one might be the one where my guy doesn't play. The NFL is just so filled with injuries that could be a thing. But in the NBA, you're hopeful of like, all right, hopefully my guy will be there. And yes, they've done things as far as the rampant, just like Greg Popovich, what was it, Tim Duncan, DNP,
DNP old. Yep.
right? Like that sort of stuff isn't allowed. But teams aren't stupid, so they say things like, you know what, LeBron's got some back tightness today.
Oh,
Oh,
LeBron, literally, just because you mentioned LeBron, he has people were freaking out game one. He's been on the injury report
yeah.
every single game with a sore foot. Like,
LeBron's turning into Tom Brady, where he was on the injury report for the Patriots every week with a sore shoulder
yeah,
because one week they didn't put him on, and then it came out he was hurt, and they got fined. So then
right.
it was Tom Brady sniffles. He's going on the
Yep.
injury report this week. But yeah, but all right. So we're in Orlando, right? It's Tuesday in Orlando. The Lakers are in the middle of their East Coast swing, and they played the night before in Miami. It was a physical game. All of a sudden, LeBron's got back tightness. He's not going to play. We all know what it is. It's LeBron's. It's load management, right? We're just not gonna push him. I mean, the Clippers are kind of sort of going through this already. I mean, they're already doing it.
With
2 games
Kawhi.
into the season in
Yep.
Oklahoma City. So yeah, it's now. What do you do for these incentives? Are we going to turn
Right.
every contract into you must play X amount of games to trigger the full value of your contract? I can't imagine the Players Association wants that because they don't want dude tears his ACL week, or game 3 of the season and he loses out on a large chunk of his money. There's a lot of reason we could see those contracts signed that way today. See, players
Yeah.
just don't do them because they're like, no, I'm not going to put all the risk on me. Because the other thing is, the reality is, let's say you're the Philadelphia 76ers, or only a million or so over the luxury tax line, and you get to game 82, and hey, Doc, if we sit out Tobias Harris tonight, he misses out on $2 million, the last $2 million of his contract. So don't play him because then he didn't trigger the games, played him out
Mhm.
in his contract. And to be clear, I'm very much making this up.
Right. Yeah.
Well, of course, then, hey, Tobias Harris, you can't play unless it was like, we need to win this game to make the playoffs. So win this game to have the 1 seed. It would be, all right, guess what? You're not playing tonight and you're going to sit. Teams already do this with guys where it's like qualifying offers for meeting starter criteria for restricted free agency and
Right.
stuff. And I can't tell you how many times I've been in conversations with player agents who are like, "Yeah, it's horse crap. I'll clean it up," and they're like, they're limiting my guy's minutes, and they know like he's not going to average the minutes he needs to hit it, or they didn't start him the last 2 weeks because then he'll be under the amount of starts to trigger starter criteria and all those kind of things. So that does happen already. It would happen much more rampantly if it was like, hey, to trigger full value. So I don't know if the league says what we'll do is we're going to hold X amount of money aside. It'll be non-salary cap money that then will be paid out as bonuses to every player who plays 75 games. We'll get an extra million or something like that. That way it's fair across the board. It's not
Mhm.
challenging. But then you run into, do I want my guy limping around out there for
Right.
10 minutes? I mean, people flipped out last year. Remember, Mike Budenholzer put Drew Holiday in a game for, I want to say it was literally like 3 seconds because he had to play to trigger a bonus in his contract.
Yeah.
So Budenholzer put him out there. Obviously, the Bucks were fully on board and were like, okay, we're cool to pay it out anyway.
Yeah.
So otherwise it wouldn't happen. But people were like, this is ridiculous. This is a mockery of the game and all this stuff. I don't want some guy limping around for 5 games playing 10 seconds every game just to trigger this extra bonus. I don't have a good solution for this other than, yeah, I'm like everybody else. I want it fixed. I want if guys are healthy enough to play, I want to see them play. But if championships are the thing, then championships are the thing. Like teams are going to continue to prioritize having guys healthy in April, May, and June over December, January, and February. It's just not going to be a thing.
Absolutely. I think that's what it comes down to, right? I mean, it's interesting that the NBA is looking for positive reinforcement here for players
Mm-hmm.
playing games rather than negative in terms of,
Sure.
hey, you sat this guy in a national TV game, so here's a fine. Instead, they're looking to incentivize players to play in these games, which it's obviously a different approach. But ultimately, it's going to come down to championship. It's going to come down to playoff runs,
Mm-hmm.
even from the organizational perspective. We look at it from the player's perspective. If you're Kevin Durant or something, a championship matters more than playing on a game
Yeah.
in January. But it's the same thing for an organization because the kind of revenue that you're going to bring in, not to say championships don't matter to organizations, they absolutely do, but just from a financial perspective, the amount of money you're going to bring in by having a long playoff run and perhaps winning a championship dwarfs any kind of negative repercussion you might face or
Mm-hmm.
even incentive you could get by playing your star player on a random Wednesday in January and then risking him blowing out his knee when he really should be resting because it's the second night of a back-to-back at the end of a 4-game and 5-day stretch or something like that.
Yep.
That's what I think will ultimately win in this situation. So even though it's not good, I don't know that the NBA has a realistic solution to this problem that's going to suddenly cause these players to play in games that they wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah, I completely agree. And the answer is not just schedule reform because we hear that a lot. The
Right.
league has done a great job eliminating back to backs, or not eliminating, but severely limiting back to backs, and also really getting rid of the things like the 4 and 5 nights and those kind of things because those were really rough on guys. So they've done a really good job of getting a lot of that stuff out. They've added days on to the schedule, whole weeks onto the schedule to make that happen. The other challenge that we've run into with this, with the league, is people say, well, they should play less games. You'll play 60 games.
There's less
Guess
revenue.
what? Then it's going to turn into 40 games is the new 60 games, right? It's going to be, so we'll play the guys 40 out of 60 games. And guys they're still going to, whatever it is, unless you went so drastic that it turned into everybody
Once a
plays
week.
everybody twice, like the Premier League, or
Sure.
yeah, it was once or twice a week or whatever, which that's just not how basketball works. We're never going to get that low amount of games. It'll never have, unless we end up with 100-team league or something. And we're never going to get that low. Yeah, I don't have a great solution to this. Just like you don't have a great solution. Like, how do you keep teams from tanking? Like I just don't fully know how to get there.
Yeah, I don't really understand why they would do that in terms of why they would even go that route at this point. This is not the kind of thing that the NBA is ultimately going to be able to solve. I think it's a nice idea to discuss,
Yeah.
but I just don't see a realistic solution for them to. I look at all the other topics that we've discussed today. I think they're all more important than this situation. As
Yeah,
much as it sucks if
yeah,
you're a fan and you go and your guy's
yep,
not playing and all of that. It's not good, but I mean, we're learning more and more about how our bodies recover, how important
mhm.
things are, sleep and travel, and how the effect it has on all that kind of stuff. We're changing the way that we view health, and sometimes that's going to become more important than superstar plays in the middle of January on a random night. It's the way it is.
And honestly, it all comes down to, just like with anything else, the only way you affect this as a fan, which, right, that's what, yes, this is how we derive our livings, but we fans first, right, of this game is stop watching, stop buying tickets, stop, like, that's the only way you can really impact this. And the
Mhm.
reality is there's just not enough people who care that much about it
Yeah.
that are gonna, they'll chirp and yell the one time LeBron comes to Orlando. I remember Kobe's last year. He didn't play in Orlando, and everybody lost their minds because
Yeah.
everybody's like, I can't believe, he didn't play. Like why didn't he play? Well, we also need to remember that last year Kobe played in a bunch of games he probably shouldn't have played in. I mean, he wasn't Kobe anymore, right?
Well, you couldn't
You know,
even see him when it was like after the game and the game was over, they pulled him out in the 4th quarter and they started wrapping him
mhm.
up.
Yeah,
It
yeah.
looked like a Halloween costume.
Yeah, looked like, yeah, exactly, exactly. Yeah, yeah. Looked like he was dressing up as the mummy because he had
Yeah.
so much tape and ice and everything else on. So yeah, it was one of those things where it's like, yeah, I don't, I don't know where, we're going with this. So yeah, it became, I get it. Like it sucked and people were upset. And it's gonna be, people are gonna be mad when LeBron misses his one game in, X amount of cities this year. Cause guess what? It's gonna happen. I mean, he's in year 20. Like, things happen. He's gonna miss, and to your point earlier on, is like you said with your Shaq story, like for some reason we're like, it's easier to swallow when it's like, I rolled an ankle last night and he's gonna
Mhm.
play tonight versus he's just tired, like, and he's,
Right.
to steal pops, he's old,
Because we've got
right? This,
in our and this is a much bigger discussion, but we've got this suck it up mentality that is glorified and
yeah,
glamorized and all
yep,
of that
absolutely.
it's well, he's just not being tough. And then
Hmm.
it reflects on the player instead of, oh, he's legitimately hurt. That's understandable. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
that gets wrapped into all this
no,
too.
completely agree. Yeah, I mean, and we get that, and we also get the whole, on the other side with is, I know so many people who are like, dude, I don't care if this guy plays then, but part of it is they're not buying tickets to go to that game, and they'll just watch a different game instead, or they're like you and I were before we started doing this. I was watching the Celtics when it was, Mark Blount out there and like Ricky Davis. Like I'm
Yeah.
gonna watch every game anyway.
Your
It
triple
doesn't really
double.
matter who plays. Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. Throwing it off the backboard to himself. But yeah, I mean, those are things, I mean, yeah, right. Like, I mean, we're gonna be watching anyways. And I think it gets underestimated by some fans how many more fans are that way
Yeah.
than are fans of the league as a whole. I think the NBA, maybe, other than the NFL, for which I think is driven very heavily by gambling and fantasy reasons, and the fact that it is only once a week for a lot of it, right? I know it's Monday and Thursday and that, but like it's one day a week, you're really invested.
Right.
I think the NBA is next because I can't tell you the last time I turned on a random Major League Baseball game and was like all fired up to watch, the Cardinals play the Royals. I don't care, right? I'm about that, but I think in the NBA world there is a lot of sense of, yeah, I like will watch even before this was my job. I will sit down and I'll watch, LeBron against Kobe
Sure.
on a, Tuesday night just because like it's LeBron against Kobe. Like that's, and that even today, right? Like I would do that with games even before. If this wasn't what I did for a living, I would do that. And that's, I think there might be a lot of people that do that, and then, like, oh, it sucks the guy's not playing. But those people, I think, for the most part, say, all right, then switch to the next game on League Pass, right?
Yep.
Up a channel, and I'm on that one, and off we go. So I don't, as for as much screaming and yelling as there gets about this, I don't know that the average person cares really all that much. If it's done, they care a heck of a lot more if it's we didn't have a real shot to win a championship because we played that guy 40
Yes.
minutes in Orlando on a back to back in a game we probably would have won anyway without him. And if we lost, wouldn't have mattered either way. Like that's
Sure.
where people get upset about.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right. I think that's a good place to
Yeah.
leave off our discussion here. Obviously, we were just there was no news today. It was just about this whole
Yep.
CBA situation, and we
Which
got
is
to get
good.
into
That
the
means there
weeds
was
on it.
no injuries.
That's
So we'll
right.
take
That's
that,
right.
right?
We didn't have half of our show taken up by injury updates for a change. I could have said a few Lakers related things, but we're okay there. We
We did
will.
that the last couple shows, and people get mad at
That's right. I
us.
meant on the injury side of things, but
Sure.
we will leave that alone for the moment. Thanks everybody for joining us. Make sure you do subscribe to the NBA Front Office Show on YouTube, as well as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever it is that you listen to podcasts. Have a great weekend. We'll see you on Monday. Stay safe.